Freedom was the buzzword on the arts scene during apartheid. Of course, the likes of playwrights Athol Fugard, musician and composer Hugh Masekela, and actress Thandi Klaasen, to name but a few, and there are so many. They use their talent to add more weight to the fight against that oppressive system. Now we fast forward to post-apartheid South Africa, some 24 years later, and how do our creatives interpret freedom now? Well, it's a wonderful panel. I'm joined by author and actress Florence Masebe, just to my left, hip-hop artist Slikour, stuck in the middle, and jazz artist and producer Victor Masondo on the far right. All of you, thank you so very much for taking time on your Freedom Day to come through and speak to us. And Florence, I'd love to start with you. Perhaps we can go around the table. Just if you could, Freedom Day for you, you wake up this morning, what's the first thing you think?
The first thing I think is we are free to create work and put it on platforms without being afraid that it will be removed or be banned. That for me means absolute freedom. I know that those who came before me would go and create beautiful pieces for theatre, for television, for anything, and not be absolutely sure that that work would actually find an audience, because it could be deemed illegal for you to produce a certain song or to come up with a certain book or to create a certain play.
And we're going to talk about that now as to how things have changed. Slikour, morning to you, mate. Thanks very much for coming in. Freedom Day to you, what does it mean?
I think for me it's a reminder that, like, things could be worse this morning and every other day. Although I'm aware of that, it's also a reminder of how much work we still need to get to really be free, you know? But without the freedom, we can't even think of what we need to do forward. So things could be worse.
And Victor Masondo, Freedom Day for you, as someone who woke up this morning and would have that history of 1994, when you wake up today, 24 years later, what does it mean to you?
Well, to me, you know, it means that realization that you can, you know, and because we grew up in an area where whatever you thought you can do was a cannot do. So right now it's just that whole thing of actually waking up to being able to remove some mental shackles that kind of hang around, even though when you've made a long move. So it's one of those that reminds me that those shackles are now what I need to be able to remove for myself and teach the next generation different from what I was taught and how I was brought up.
And Florence, I'm so glad Victor said that, because you touched on the creatives and what you are now able to do, and how different is it now, knowing that these shackles are gone, they're not forgotten, but how does that change how you look at your career and what you do?
The change now becomes that I've got to remember that my voice matters, and I've got to remember that there's nothing stopping me just after 94, we were really buying, I think, into the melting pot in terms of the arts and how we created things. Now we've got to remind ourselves, as artists, be there to reflect, be there to question, use your voice for all the things that before it was illegal for you to do.
And Slikour, I imagine, as someone who lives in the hip-hop world and the kind of expression that comes from that music, Florence used the word melting pot and black and white art and artists. From the hip-hop side of things, how has this changed? How does that messaging change? Because hip-hop particularly is so powerful in being so clear and forthright on what it's trying to say.
Look, for me, I feel that, like, you know, I feel that, like, creatives at this point, it's like South Africa at this point, it's like having political power. But until creatives start owning things, the message will never control the messages. And that's got nothing to do with, like, freedom. That's got everything to do with, well, with creative freedom. That's got everything to do with, if I can sit here and I respect both Florence and Victor as my elders, there's a certain way I'm going to address them, because that's how I've been taught at home. So if I own a platform, a broadcasting platform or anything, there's a certain way I'm going to take out certain content to speak to who we are. we still don't have platforms that speak to who we are. And the independent social platforms of Twitter literally like are influenced by the global kind of like trends of just like being disruptive. Yeah. And kids are literally learning that from social, but that's not where they come from. So even creatives are still not in a point where all the platforms where we communicate are actually rooted from where we come from. You know what I mean? So for me, I feel that's really going to always be the barrier of how far we can go with freedom and how far we can go with creativity. It's ownership.
And Victor, why aren't we owning the platforms that we are supposed to be on? What's happening?
Most times it has come from, I used to say that I used to experience a lot of people who used to think through their stomach and not think through what is going to happen, in the future. Because as when you see yourself as an entity and as an investment, you are driven by the fact that who I am is so important that I need to invest in me, because the me part, whether it brings something to my stomach or not, but it will in the future secure something substantial. So I think that for me it's been one of the things.
If you just joined us, 8 minutes after 8, it's a wonderful discussion we're having about the creative angle of Freedom Day and everything we are fighting for. I have Florence Masebe, Slikour with me, also Victor Masondo. By the way, if you do want to get hold of us and ask any of them a question, I'm just the guy sitting here with the microphone. It's also your show. You can tweet us. That's the easiest way. Go onto our Twitter handle, look for @ENCA, send us a tweet, perhaps just use either Florence's name, Slikour or Victor. I'll see if I can get that question through to them. And Florence, maybe while viewers are doing that, how different is it now? The kind of creatives that we saw during the fight against oppression come 94 and now 24 years later, children coming out of 94 are now full-grown adults. Do you think they are understanding their role and what creatives are trying to get across to them, or is the messaging getting lost somewhere?
Which messaging? That's the question we should be asking ourselves, because perhaps we became we ran away with the freedom and the rainbow a little too soon before we had actually taught the children what we needed to tell. The arts will always be responsible for a whole lot more things than just entertaining people. So while what we do entertains, we have a duty to keep record, to archive, to teach. So if we are no longer on the path that your Makebas and your Masekelas were on, who's teaching young people today in the language of art that they understand today about the horrors of where we came from? Children who were not here 24 years ago do not know just how ugly South Africa was, do not even understand why today we must get up and celebrate it. But if we in the arts understood that that's the story we should be putting out in theater, there's a story that should be out in the galleries, there's a story that should be in film and television, across all platforms, we need to take that voice back and know that we are actually the sector that can drive the social cohesion thing that we're still battling with.
Slikour, is music, while trying to show what has happened, as Florence says, we can't forget that and just how horrible that was, you can't play that down, is the music too negative without enough hope? Is it too much reminding of what happened and not a lesson of what needs to happen now?
I like looking at the source of everything. Music today is influenced by what mass media says is what you need to do to make a living. A lot of the music, and unfortunately mass media also doesn't live up to the principles of who we are sometimes, but you will compromise who you are. That's why they go, don't sell out when you become famous, or don't change. You'll compromise who you are, because the mass media perception that's been built is around this, right? And we all know the power of culture. We all know how culture changes minds, right? So, and like, once again, we don't own mass media. So because we all know like the power of how culture changes thoughts and everything else, I feel you've got like even generations from the arts and culture who literally like have invested in art, but like a lot of things that happen in South Africa, we invest in people, individuals, or ideas, like it's a tender or whatever, but we don't invest in development of structures. So right now, if we say the point of access for the market is on data, is through people's phones, there should be a conversation on how, with all the networks, like it should even be a government thing. It should be going, how are we actually like removing data to actually start communicating certain, whether it's, even if it's e-education, you know what I mean? How are we actually like taking that, but once again, the ownership of getting to that bridge is nowhere close to us as people. You know what I mean? So all those things, if we talk about the messaging of music, it's really impacted by mass media that we so far from owning. Do you know what I mean? You could talk about Miriam, you can talk about, but like today the kids are almost hearing, they're going to hear about Marvin Gaye first, or like more prominent, because Marvin Gaye is in the system that comes from mass media globally. You know what I mean? Black Panther, I'm closing it up. Yeah. Black Panther was literally like, I think the real great thing about Black Panther is that you got the Kani family, who I think they've paid their dues so much as Africans to be in that position. But Black Panther is really an American story of how Black Americans have got this thing missing in their cycle about getting back to Africa. But it's got nothing to do with Black South Africans, because we've had Shaka Zulu, you know? We've had Black heroes that like we don't have the mediums. You got guys like Dr. Stolo who could tell you a lot of stories about the Zulu heroes, these Sutu heroes, but Mashwesha and everything, but we don't have the media, we don't have the storybooks. We're reading Snow White to our kids, you know, or something white. But the point is that we need to start owning our stories and making our kids believe Black Panther is not my hero, Shaka Zulu is my hero.
And the reason I wanted to jump in there, and I'll tell you why I bring this up, there is a PhD Afromusicology student currently in South Africa. A few weeks ago, we had a chance to go to, on this very channel, the Gauteng Opera. Matuba Machlachi and Joanne Joseph were there. It was their final performance. They were going to close down. I understand arts and culture has now come in with something of a stipend. I'm not sure where we are on that. And Victor, that's what I wanted to ask you. It's this mass media, the support, but then it's this continued development of the arts. And if you've got something like Gauteng Opera beginning to close down, the reason I mentioned the PhD student is one of the questions asked is, why is, for example, opera, in this particular case, still doing European, white, Western opera? Where is the African opera? Where are we?
You know, that's a very, I wish we had 2 hours to get to that, because when you look at African opera, we've got a lot of people who wrote some great music. I mean, you know, we did it from classical to whoever you name it. And so what happens, though, is that it becomes almost like, oh, it's that cute. That's cute. And then whatever comes through is packages of what has been working. You know, I mean, people will tell you now, I'm going to say the Phantom of the Opera. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and that's going to get proper everything. The package is there. You know, you name it. So when it comes time for us to tell our stories, I mean, there's King Kong, for an example. From a South African point of view, it has not been even seen from there. I mean, there was a revival of King Kong, but what happened in there, I looked at it and I thought, wow, the story of King Kong was not really about a boxer. It was about a story of our freedom. And so there's so many things that are happening. You know, we're becoming just, okay, let's just do some courtesy. You know, and so I think it's really time, because what's happening is that, just to add to this, is that our community is becoming more like what is good is not South African. As a South Africa, and here is a well.
Forgive me, Victor, is that perception the same on television? Florence, we're going to start wrapping up soon, but on the television side, we're talking about music and opera and hip-hop, but what about the TV side, from your background? I mean, is that still being represented?
Look, we have literally gone through, in 1994, we were still taking all our work from production houses run by mostly white men writing black stories. Now black people are writing the stories for black audiences, but the shackles that Victor was talking about are still there. So you still shackle yourself and still leave yourself in those stereotypical roles, even as you write the black story today. What we need to do is to honestly just move away and say, what are our important stories and what are we going to decide to stick with and tell no matter what?
And Slikour, perhaps final comment from you, if you could, on that. What do you want to see happen now? If you could tell, either it's big media, maybe it's the Arts and Culture Minister, maybe it's opera houses, maybe it's radio stations. Who are you telling what to this Freedom Day?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody needs to be told. I think it's a conversation of, we got to remember one thing. If you don't feed me anything, I'll be hungry and I'll be starved. And I'll eat the first thing that I get fed immediately. So if there's no space to feed our people our stories, who we really are, we're going to really consume the global stories. We're going to really believe that Black Panther is really a black hero, whatever the case be. So the headspace of our people is not because it's of their choice. It's because they're not being given enough options. We only eat junk food because you see more junk food stores in the road versus like a bunch of gardens with like carrots and everything else. So that's even how the mind works, with entertainment, with thinking, etc., etc. So me, as a message to all South Africa, especially everybody from brands to politics, blah, blah, let's just be honest with who we are. Let's just come back to zero and build from zero, you know?
And Victor Masondo, final comment from you. Who are you talking to and what are you telling them today?
I'm talking to, you know, for me, whenever I've got an opportunity to meet any of the younger generation, my duty is to load them with as much information of what is the wealth of what I know that is missing. Because when I can do that, if each one can continue to teach one, they will know that what they are consuming is not what is good. It's like if you've developed a taste for genetically modified carrots, when I give you the organic ones, you'll never be able to process them. So that's the whole thing. It's like being able to say, here's the real taste though. So get used to this, because this is what's going to sustain you. Yeah. That's our duty.
Yeah, carrots are good for you, I hear. Thank you very much for everyone for coming in to speak to us this morning. If you've just missed part of this, it's author and actress Florence Masebe, hip-hop artist, Slikour, and jazz artist and producer, the well-known Victor Masondo. If you've missed any of this, by the way, we will have it on enca.com in just a short while, and also on YouTube later. So give us a little while, we'll get it up on the websites as well. Thank you very much indeed for all of you coming in to speak to us.